Hello, America. Welcome to the Junto Podcast, where we promote the practical applications of critical thinking and bold creativity. I'm your host, Edgar Mills. Thank you for joining us. Hello, good people. Welcome back. This is episode 54. And again, as always, I thank you for sticking with me and for listening to my opinions on things. So on the last episode, we talked about small business and we compared the 6 principles that Admiral McRaven laid out for special operations, and we talked about the theory of relative superiority and how you can get ahead in your business and defeat a larger force, defeat a larger company, or at least stay competitive. Well, going back a little bit on that and staying with the same theme, right, of how small business and the military kind of jive with each other, or military doctrine. This time, the comparisons and parallels I'm going to draw between small business, entrepreneurship, small business startups, and the 7 phases of unconventional warfare. And even deeper, the principles of guerrilla warfare as laid out by Mao Zedong and T.E. Lawrence. Mao Zedong, however you want to say it. Yeah, Mao. Infamous communist leader of Red China, and T.E. Lawrence, who is, I guess you could say, one of the fathers of unconventional warfare as we know it today. So yeah, let's talk about it. Now, Lawrence was prominent before Mao came to prominence, and it was 2 very different fights that they were in, but they both draw from similar foundations to Sun Tzu and Clausewitz and some others. So they both, now I'm drawing from the 10 principles on guerrilla warfare from Mao, and then Lawrence's the Arab Revolt from 16 to 18. And those are the things we'll be drawing from here. And what both of those instances did was show that a small motivated force can beat a larger conventional force by using some principles that are unique to unconventional warfare, being mobile and agile, having the support of the populace, and focusing on the enemy's weaknesses. And not through direct face-to-face communication. Yeah, because a big standing army, like you guys tell me, in the current conflict with Iran and this and that, what army on the planet could stand toe-to-toe with the U.S. Army or the U.S. military? I'm going to be bold and say none. We might suffer a lot. We might spend a lot of treasure, but I don't believe any force on the planet of the earth can go toe-to-toe with the U.S. So why would you want to, right? So you do unconventional things. You hit weaknesses. You exploit weaknesses. Well, those principles map over into the phases of unconventional. So doctrinally, there are 7 phases of unconventional warfare. And then there's special operations. There's a couple of different manuals out there. One's classified, one's not, and we're pulling from the unclassified one. But entrepreneurs out there, people who are looking to start businesses, startups, smaller scale guys, whether you aim to scale up big and large later or not, that's not what we're talking about right this moment. What we're talking about is how these startup entrepreneurs kind of unknowingly execute the unconventional warfare phases, and they kind of work out of the playbook, on a daily basis, really, whether you know it or not. And there are many parallels. I am attempting, now when I say successful small businesses do X, Y, and Z, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm talking about my business. Yes, I think I'm pretty successful at to my metrics, to the things that are making me happy at the moment. But I am in no way where I want to be as a business. But we can look at other small businesses out there and apply, kind of generally say, oh, yes, that is a successful business or not. Well, what I'm going to point out throughout this whole thing here is how successful small businesses, they mirror Guerrilla Doctrine, like right along the way. And what is a guerrilla doctrine? What does a revolution look like? What does a resistance look like? Well, they're kind of revolutionary in spirit, right? Like they're revolting against something, an oppressive government or even an invasive force or something like that. Well, as a small business, you are revolting against something, right? You're not happy with what's the status quo. You're trying to bring forth something new and different and better. So yeah, I mean, I think most small businesses who take the stand, right? You're like, you know what? I'm not working for this company anymore. I'm not in this rat race anymore. I am starting my own little revolution, and I'm going out and becoming independent on my own, or with a team, but to be independent. I think that's a commonality. What do you think? And then what is another thing that resistances is necessary for a resistance to succeed, a revolution to succeed? Well, you are very dependent upon the populace, winning hearts and minds. If you don't have the support of the people, and I mean the vast majority of the people, you're going to crash and burn in an unconventional warfare frame of thought. But also as a small business, right? You got to have the customers. The customers have to support you, especially as a small business. So you have to earn their trust, just like a revolution has to earn the trust of their population. And what else? I said a few of these things a minute ago. You got to be mobile and flexible or agile. You have to be adaptable. You have to be able to move when the time. Remember, we talked about the law of timing, the 21 irrefutable laws. If the time is right, you have to move. If conditions change, you have to be flexible. You have to be able to take the hit and bounce back. And then another thing that is unique to revolutions, to resistances, is that they are always in an offensive mindset, not a defensive mindset. Because one, yes, security is always a thing. But as a small force, you're not trying to hold a giant piece of earth. You're not trying to hold a piece of key terrain. You're not big enough. You're not equipped enough to defend. But what you are, and do it well, is you off small offenses against weak points. So you always have to stay offensive minded, which means on the move, always looking to push the next thing, whatever your offerings are, whatever your products are. You have to be on the offensive against the market. Revolutionaries, right? Resistance movements, guerrilla fighters. You exploit, and small businesses, you exploit gaps in the market, or you exploit gaps in the larger forces, I don't know, supply chain or something like that. You avoid big toe-to-toe, head-to-head battles with larger companies and larger forces to stay alive, because as a small business, though we're resilient, you could probably be crushed if somebody put a little focus on it. And then these guerrilla forces, how do they build their stockpiles? Well, they don't have stockpiles, right? Battlefield recovery. They replenish their strength through captured equipment and even captured people who they just turn into their own fighters. Well, as a small business, that looks like market share, right? You capture one little piece at a time. You capture a piece of the market share, you exploit that, you grow that, and then you move forward on the offensive. Yeah. So we're going to look at the 7 phases of unconventional warfare and try to compare them, parallel them with, well, small business applications, and then show during these big, broad phases as seen through the doctrine of unconventional warfare, how specifically they kind of go along with the guerrilla warfare there. Because don't confuse guerrilla warfare and unconventional warfare. They're not one and the same. So preparation is phase 1. And that sounds like a no-brainer, right? As a businessman. But preparation is not necessarily a physical thing. You're collecting intelligence right now. You're studying the terrain via map or whatever technology you have. You're looking at the population. You're doing what is called information or intelligence preparation of the environment. You're trying to get as much knowledge about what you're about to go into. And if it's a foreign country or if it's, a battle, like you're trying to learn as much about your enemy as possible, as much about their networks, as much about anything that you can. And Lawrence illustrates this real good in his journey because he, before becoming an officer, when he was younger, he was a archaeologist, and this guy walked on a tour of the Crusaders' castles in Syria. He walked 1,000 miles across Syria in 1909 to study those castles. He learned the Arabic language. He learned about the tribal dynamics and all that before the actual Arab revolt against the Ottomans. And that was him doing preparing the operational environment. He was soaking in as much information as he could. And that was long before combat ever started. Yeah. Area assessments, intelligence preparation. Well, what does that look like as an entrepreneur? Yeah, you're doing market analysis. You're looking at the terrain, which is the market, the trends in your field, whatever your field is. And you're looking at competitors, and you're looking at their feedback they get from customers. You're looking at their vulnerabilities. Yeah, before you ever launch anything. That's what phase 1 looks like. Do the market analysis. When you're building your business plan, find out as much as you can about everything you can, about the geographic area, the habits of the people in that area, the people who are meant to be your customers. Now, if you're an international or selling things online, that's a different thing. But then you look at internet trends and how people buy and things like that. So yeah, in phase 1, you're shaping your battlefield. You're shaping your battlefield. Yeah. And once you think you know everything there is to know about your battlefield, then you launch. There's always always unknowns are going to be out there. That's why we plan for contingencies. But prepare your battlefield by going in and pulling out the information and intelligence that you need to make your vision happen. What's phase 2? Anybody listening to this who's a military man, Green Beret or whatever, 7 phases of unconventional warfare. That's the whole buildup of Robin Sage or the Q course, the Special Forces Qualification course. It all builds up to the final phase, and it's Robin Sage, and that's where you're basically on an accelerated timeline going through all of these phases of unconventional warfare. And it's called initial contact. Now, that's not full-blown force-on-force contact, folks. That's initial. That's your pilot team or your advanced party or someone. And again, I'm going to go back to Lawrence on this one. He met with Emir Faisal well before and built a relationship built on respect, really. And Faisal, I think, was impressed that Lawrence, knew as much as he did about, Syria. And because of that initial contact, they were strong allies together. And they ultimately, kind of reshaped the whole Middle East. But from Mao's perspective, and this was, decades later, he stressed, even Mao stressed, that having good rapport with the populace was a foundation for guerrilla fighters' success. So even that initial contact you make with people who may or may not be a customer or whatever, establishing rapport early. Now, some of us are not, what do you call it? What's the word I'm looking for? Charismatic. Some of us make bad first impressions. Some of us not so much. And if you're a guy like me, I'm what I like to refer to as direct communicator. That oftentimes does not make a good impression on people. Oftentimes. How do I know this? Because oftentimes I have failed due to direct communication. But in UW though, especially, you go in and you got this initial contact with key leaders, really, and it might be under dubious or sensitive sort of conditions, but you've got to make some kind of contact with someone who is going to then help you to grow and succeed and things like that. So that might, for an entrepreneur, look like, you're pitching a customer on your product, or furthermore, you're pitching an investor on your product or what you need or whatnot. No matter what it is, there has to be some baseline level of trust established, or at least is there potential that I could, is there trustworthiness that can be developed here? Yeah, trust is what turns strangers into partners, man. Yeah. Okay. Initial contact, build trust. Now, I'm going to give an example because this is kind of local. Those of you who may or may not know who Sarah Blakely is, she started the company Spanx, which is like fitness clothes for ladies. And I think she cold called like Neiman Marcus, and she had like $5,000 and like a prototype of her product. But I think her ability to win them over with some probably she was probably very authentic, and she was probably very impassioned, and she may have even come off a little vulnerable to this gigantic company, and that got her in the door. Yep, that got her some shelf space, and boom, Spanx. Now I think they may have ended up selling that, and she still has shares of that, but I don't know her life story on that. I'm saying she's a perfect example of some small startup that fits into the phases of unconventional warfare. Yeah. So, one genuine conversation with somebody, one respectful, genuine conversation that can ignite your brand, right? That can ignite your brand. Phase 3. Phase 3 is infiltration. Well, that's a very military sounding word. And I'm gonna use the two guys first. Lawrence their method of infiltration into enemy held terrain or areas was a little, they were cruising around on camels. Yeah. Hard to detect, right? So you're cruising through the desert on camels. That's not a big signature, right? And plus, back in those days, there wasn't all the technology that there is these days. But yeah, they moved small and under the radar, as it were. And and on the same token, Mao kind of advocated that you entered rural areas and small cities first, right, before trying to get into and work in larger urban areas so as not to be found out. Infiltration is probably one of the most difficult and dangerous parts of a whole operation if you're looking at the phases of UW. Yeah, for sure. So you infill quietly. Yep. And then make your moves from there. How's that parallel with entrepreneurial small business? Yeah, especially startups and little businesses like mine. We're sort of niche, right? So you can see how it could grow into a larger thing, but right now it's pretty niche and it's pretty small scale. So the footprint is small, right? Any of the bigger companies out there doing the things I do, they don't know who I am. Yeah, and they may never know who I am. And as we're marketing as entrepreneurs in this infiltration phase, I heard about this thing called guerrilla marketing where you put your thing out there, but then you like tag a bigger company that does the things you do, but you tag them and people make an association. You know what I mean? And then the social media market, you got all this micro influencers and all this stuff. Work. Now, I put my stuff all out there. I told you guys I'm not a strategic mastermind. I'm upfront about what I'm doing and everything like that. But even then, what I'm doing, even when I put it out on the podcast, it's still to a pretty narrow audience, right? So ultimately in infiltration, we're staying low, staying under radar while we're getting our footing in this new market or this new area. I want to say Mao maybe said, arrive like vapor, silent, pervasive, impossible to pin down. That's pretty good. We do want to arrive like vapor, but we can't stay silent for too long, right? Otherwise, we're not gonna succeed. So phase 4 is organization. Now we've got to we're foot in the door. We're foot in the door. Now we can start to look around and begin to organize. Mao and Lawrence both, they turn tribes and farmers into a functional fighting force. And Lawrence noted that small units outperformed giant mobs, right? He was an advocate of small unit tactics. And I think Mao was the first to introduce the organizing into an underground and guerrilla network. And then there's auxiliary in there as well. So the underground, the auxiliary, and the guerrilla forces are who make up your resistance. And you may have a bunch of support from the population. Well, I hope you do. That's the way to do it. But the underground helps you in a certain way, right? The auxiliary helps you in a certain way, probably like logistics and getting from point A to point B and that kind of thing. And then the guerrilla forces, what is it? Everybody knows what a guerrilla's job is, right? You're the fighting force. You're the ones out there doing the hit and run and the disruption and the offensive type tactics to keep the bigger force off balance. Well, how can we organize? How does this apply to entrepreneurial actions? Well, never mind our people. Like, what if you're a one-man show? There's you're not organizing yourself, right? You're organizing your early clients, and you're building your early clients into people who will advocate for you. Well, and you're doing that through the trust, right? That we talked about earlier. And you build your early clients into, like brand evangelists, you know what I mean? They're out there when they're talking good about you. And they spread the message like, hey, have you been to OSS? Have you shot a match at OSS, And that's good. And we want that. We want to continue to build that during the organization phase for sure. But that's something that is ongoing. We always want to keep that. Well, one, trust with our clients. Two, that our clients are out there pushing. And ultimately, what I'm saying by that is our clients and our customers, especially in my business, you can't look at them as just transactions. They're not just a dollar figure. That in the scope of what we're talking about today, they are your resistance. They are your auxiliary and underground. Yeah, they are your support structure. You know a guy who knows a guy. Well, next thing you know, that's a helpful asset. So treat your customers like you treat your employees if you have employees. Like treat them with a little care and respect, a little honesty, trust. They are your resistance movement. And then after organization, phase 5 comes buildup. Yeah, buildup. Now, we might have mentioned it earlier, like Mao and with Lawrence and Mao, but how did they build up? Well, one, they replenished their gear with captured enemy gear. And then in between campaigns, they would rest, they would train, reconsolidate, reorganize, and they would also recruit. And they even recruited from within some of the other people that they fought with. Yeah, and T.E. Lawrence and their fighting forces. Yeah, man, that was basically how they armed themselves, was with Turkish weapons, Turkish horses, Turkish supplies, and then they would rotate fresh parties, doing these raids. I bet half the raids were done simply to get provisions and weapons and whatnot. But at some point, yeah, we've got to build up our logistical capacity and maybe be able to scale that a little bit so that our resources are more dependable. That we don't have to depend on just having a friend who, well, my buddy builds target stands, and then your buddy moves to Washington, or something. So you have to build up as an entrepreneur logistics for sure, but your systems. You start to build these infrastructure systems. And folks in the entrepreneurial space, like your systems are what takes the place of your hustle when you were brand new starting out. Eventually you build systems that are functional and consistent. And then even you start to maybe recruit, a little talent here and there. And you shore up your SOPs during this build-up phase. Yeah. And then you start to maybe, what would be, in an entrepreneurial sense, what would be capturing enemy resources, right? You're starting to get a little piece of that market share. And you might even start to pull some dudes from other companies to work for you, stuff like that. Starting to get a little revenue flowing. That's the build-up for an entrepreneur. But it starts with your systems and your processes. You're getting those in place so that they're, I don't want to say unbreakable, but yeah, man, pretty solid. The build-up phase is where the vision of the resistance meets the functional, logistical piece of it, right? The vision meets the functionality during the build-up phase. Okay, we've built up. We've got our processes in place. What's next? We've got we've got a resistance built up now. We've got auxiliary and underground, and we've got a guerrilla force. We've got our hands on some resources. Now it's employment, right? Phase 6, employment. You've got to employ your forces to really start to get. So Mao, probably like 5 of his principles are I'm about to shake out in like one sentence here, but attack dispersed and weaker forces first. Yep. Focus on destroying enemy strength, not holding ground. Focus on disrupting his pattern and not just trying to hold ground. Concentrate the bulk of your forces at decisive points that draws the enemy into mobile warfare, because that's one of our strengths as guerrilla fighters, right? And then strike at weakly defended points. And all that was from Mao's principles. He in his book, there were 10 principles. That was like 5 of them right there. Well, decades before that, T. Lawrence embodied those principles. And I'm sure Mao was familiar with and probably very educated on the methods of Lawrence. They raided Turkish rail lines with very small, highly mobile little raiding parties. And they even had armored cars that they got from previous raids. And they avoided like strong points altogether. So when they hit their rail lines, what did that do? That disrupted the Turks' ability to resupply. They disrupted their supply chain. That's unconventional warfare, folks. That's good stuff right there. You coordinate smaller forces to disrupt the larger adversary. And at some point, based on what we talked about last time, about Admiral McRaven's theory of relative superiority, with those smaller coordinated forces, you can achieve relative superiority. Yeah, and win the battle, for sure. And ultimately the war by doing so. What does that look like for a small business? Well, that's your ad campaigns and your marketing. That's you trying to extend your reach a little bit to a bigger geographical area or space. That's you doing creative marketing, creative pricing, right? And so that you're not only competitive, right? You can undercut on certain things for periods of time, right? Offer specials and offer, 2-for-1s and BOGOs and all that stuff. That's what that looks like in practice for small business people. Employment of your forces, that's employing your small strategies, your guerrilla strategies. Yeah. And in that timing, which we talked about the law of timing from Maxwell, the timing and the coordination can be the spark that creates the bigger fire. And as that small coordinated efforts, as those small coordinated parties, you can get the relative superiority, and you can disrupt the market and bring maximum disorder to your local market, and make that disorder become your equilibrium, your happy space, right? I've said this before, and it's not to be anything other than this, just the way it shook out. In the midst of chaos on an objective, for instance, in combat and in training, I sort of thrived during that chaos. And I'm able to manage it. I'm able to manage my emotions and see opportunity, see gaps, and adjust. That's not me as an individual. I mean, as a team, and I'm able to we're agile and we're flexible and we're able to shift and shape in order to meet whatever the challenge is. I've always been very proud of that about myself, as a combat leader. Now, I can't say that same held true in garrison too much, but I once had a platoon sergeant, and I may have said this before, but I'll say it again because it stuck with me. When I was a young E5 fire team leader in the 82nd Airborne Division, and this guy, and I'll say his name, Larry Lunsford, he didn't like me too much, and we were doing something, I don't know, man, Shoot Guard Gordon Village in JRTC or somewhere, something, and he says, "Damn it, Mills, how come when we're in combat I can depend on you to save the world, but in garrison you just don't seem to care?" I was like, well, I don't know what to say to that. You know what I mean? Because my priorities are focused on being the best warfighter I could be, I guess. I don't know. But it stuck with me, though. I can depend on you to save the world in combat, but in garrison, you just don't seem to care. Well, folks, garrison's a whole different body. You want to talk about bureaucracy and hurry up and wait and all those things, that's it. All right, what's phase 7 of unconventional warfare, folks? So let's go through them. We have preparation, then we have initial contact. That's sort of the initial meets there. And then we have infiltration, where we're trying to go in with our force and get a foothold. And then once we're in, we're trying to organize to get ourselves ready. And then we're trying to build up. So, and during the organization, during phase 5, we're trying to get our systems square. And then during phase 5, I say phase 4 organization, phase 5 build up. Now we're trying to get all our systems are in place. Now we're trying to build those systems to be able to function fully at their full capacity. And then in phase 6, we're employing all those systems and all those things, all our forces, right? Well, we've employed our forces. We're fighting the battles. We're winning the battles. All right, and the war rages on, but we're fighting and winning battles. Well, phase 7 of unconventional warfare is transition. So every guerrilla force, being a small, what you imagine to be a ragtag group of this, that, and the other. Well, if your guerrilla force wins, right? If you're defeating the invaders or the occupiers, well, eventually you take over, right? You've won, you've defeated the occupiers. And Mao envisioned his guerrilla forces, evolving into conventional armies. And that's pretty much what happened. Whereas T.E. Lawrence, well, after the Arab revolt, Lawrence stepped aside as conventional forces came to Damascus, and he understood that the revolution or the resistance to success, I mean, that was a metric of success, was handing authority over to the larger, more established force. Yeah. And both of these, Mao and Lawrence, yeah, they understood fluidity, right? And they knew when the nature of the fight shifted, when it changed. Well, the difference being that Mao envisioned his guerrilla forces and resistance becoming the bigger, now the conventional force, whereas Lawrence didn't think that. He thought, hey, we disband, go back to living a happy tribal life. And my thoughts on that, and I wrote a paper on this, a blog, or not a blog. I did a course on this. I created a course on this. I think had that Arab revolt gone on and on and on, had it been longer, would Lawrence have envisioned his guerrilla fighters becoming the conventional army? That's the question. The answer is, I think no, and I'll tell you why I think no. The Chinese, I don't know as much about the Chinese people or the nation or its history, But I gotta imagine the Chinese are a little bit more homogenous than the Middle East. And what I know from experience, which is why I'm saying what I'm saying, is that when you have tribal or different tribes, you might have them working together for a moment in time, but they're always going to have allegiance to the tribe. And if you, much like in Afghanistan, when you try to make the Afghan National Army and you got people from different tribes standing side by side in formation, it don't always go over very well. It don't, and that becomes a whole nother problem. So I think Lawrence thought the way he thought because of the geographic location where he was at, the indigenous people that he knew intimately. And then I think Mao, like I said, in my guesstimation, China was a little more homogenous and also a little more strict in their regime. Like the communist regime was, they would probably quell any internal disagreements pretty damn fast. So yeah, in UW, that's what you do, right? In transition, you demobilize the guerrilla fighters. You may have some strategic guys that you keep in place and make them a part of a conventional force or whatnot. You hand authority over to a legitimate structure, legitimate regime, governmental structure, and then you move on to train for the next fight. Well, what is transition in the entrepreneurial aspect? Well, you're moving on from like a tough, scrappy little like insurgency, right? You're a small startup. You do some good stuff. People love it. So do you level out right there and get yourself in a sort of homeostasis where, all right, I'm happy right here. I don't want to grow. I don't want to shrink. I'm going to provide what I provide. I'm happy with the money I'm bringing in, the number of customers I have, etc. Or do you have an exit strategy to where you try to build success that gets successful enough that you can then sell out to a larger, maybe one of your competitor, large scale competitors for what you see as an awesome amount of money, and then you tap out and go buy a boat and go hang out and sip on drinks at the beach? Or do you have a vision to stick with it and become an industry behemoth? You started out small, tough, tenacious. You've grown, you've worked hard to grow this success, and now you're just going to keep doubling down, keep offering more and more, building larger and larger, hiring more and more people. So you're going to scale up to epic proportions? Or then what else? I'll tell you what my move is. Now, look, I'm still a long way off, folks. I'm probably somewhere in the if I had to put myself in a phase right now, I'm probably about phase 4, phase 3. Yeah. I'm saying I'm 1 foot in phase 3, 1 foot in phase 4 for my own business. And look, that's about what, 17, that's about almost 9 years in operation. No, that is 9 years in operation, and I'm still only in phase 3, phase 4. That could have a lot to do with just it's me doing it. Maybe somebody else could have made this thing happen in 6 months from start to finish. At any rate, my bad. I got off. What is my view of the? Well, I want to build up, not into a behemoth, but to sustain, national level shooting matches. Yeah, I want to be able to sustain national level shooting matches, and I want to have a pretty huge customer base. I mean, like I want there to be 2,000 members of the range. Now, 2,000, yeah, that's what I want. Would I be happy with more than that? Yeah. But I think 2,000 is a right number. But once we're able to maintain about 2,000 clients or members, and once we're able to consistently run multiple national level matches from big organizations, USPSA, IDPA, PCS League, the tactical games. I'm going to say, man, this is success right here. And everybody should know this, I do aim for my son Ezekiel to step into my role, my space, and take that over. And then launch a new venture. Yeah. And some of you that know me, once the range is running smooth and I don't want to say on autopilot, but where Zeke's running and whatever partners that we have are everybody's running smooth. Everybody's making pretty decent money. Everybody's pretty happy with life. I'm looking to launch a new venture in the indoor rock climbing business. Yeah, that's what's out there for me. Now, I mentioned Sarah Blakely. Let's go back because she's another example that she did sell a majority stake in Spanx. I think she maintained sort of creative control, and her and her husband, they're always launching some new thing. They're always out there launching things, new business ventures and events and stuff like that. And they're doing quite well, by the way. So that, that's in my future. I aim to do that. And it's not a matter of if, but when. That's what it is. Now, what I've discovered, folks, I've said this on different podcasts as well. There are people out there who will look you straight in the eye when you talk about things. They go, "Oh, money's not the problem. This, that, and the other is." Well, I beg to differ. Money is the only problem. I can tell you from my own experience, folks, that I have a pretty solid network of good human beings around me, great human beings, and I have a pretty solid. What I would say is the populace, I believe, supports Osprey Shooting Solutions and, the silo and whatever I'm doing. I've got, I think, a good, strong base of support for. What I don't have is pockets full of money. Yeah. So it's been very tough trying to find, people who, well, we need land. Can we do this or we do that? Are you willing to do this and that and the other? It's tough, but that's the way it is. That's the way it is. So yeah, we're looking to get to a point of where we level, where we don't want to grow anymore. Well, we don't want to grow into a behemoth, but we do want to grow to be a national level asset, a national level attraction. But yeah, you know when to transition power, right? And that's, for me, that's to my son. I do have a point in my mind when I'm going to transition everything over to him and and then move on. Obviously staying in there, whatever, obviously. So yeah, that transition. Yeah, there has to be a transition somewhere. And you see this with the big companies out there. You got these big companies always buying and selling each other. You've got these mergers of all these behemoths. And that stuff lends itself to politics, and it lends itself to corruption, and it lends itself to all these things. So I definitely don't want to be in that space. I don't think you do either. And then, yeah, transition to the good life, whatever life that is for you. So, kind of mashing up unconventional warfare, guerrilla warfare, and then kind of entrepreneurial, well, the phases of unconventional warfare, and then mashing that up with what does that look like against a small business? I think that, well, we know a few things. You need populist support. You need a good customer base. You need people who want to see you succeed. Or that even if they don't like you, they like your product. You need that. You got to have the support of the populace. You need to be flexible flexible, right? I got a catchphrase out there. I said it the other day and somebody laughed pretty hard. I say, hey, I'm as flexible as a Russian ballerina. You have to be flexible. You have to. There's always dynamics out there that you don't control. And if you're not flexible, they might knock you down. So be flexible. Okay, I'll be up 5 minutes. Sorry, folks. So yeah, be flexible. As a small business person, we're not going after the behemoths. We're not going after the big businesses, right? Yeah, we want to exploit their weaknesses. That's not going to harm them. Andy, they're not losing much market share if we're getting market share, right? First of all, in my opinion, I never went to business school, good people, but I don't think the market is a finite piece of like circle, right? I don't think it's finite. When you say, well, if I'm getting a piece of the market share, that's taking away a piece of the market. I don't think so. I think the market grows. That's what I think. So understand that. And as small businesses, we're the resistance, folks. We're the revolutionaries as small businesses. So we're light, we're fast, and we're waging unconventional warfare against the marketplace. That's what we're doing. And these parallels, I don't think they're necessarily coincidental, right? I think they're pretty I think they're pretty timeless, really. I mean, when did Lawrence do when was that? When did he walk across Syria? 1909 or something like that. So I think the principles hold up, and I think they hold up against business, and I think they hold up still to unconventional warfare today. Yeah. So I think they're a good blueprint. Check them out and match the phases of unconventional warfare. Match them up to your business plan and see where you think you're at. If not, hey, at least if you're starting out right now, at least it's a pretty good structure to work against. Yeah, it's a pretty good structure to work against. All right, folks, that's what I wanted to talk about. I thought, last week I wanted to keep a theme of talking about sort of special operations things as they are relatable to, small business things. And I think you can get a lot from it. So you can read business books. I've read a few, and it's dry. And you can read military doctrine, and it's dry. But reading the military doctrine might give you a little different approach. It might give you a little different vision of how you can do a thing. Yeah, it can help. And that's why I'm here, folks, to help you. All right, good people, I appreciate you listening. Please comment, ask questions, whatever it is. I welcome it. Please do that. Unconventional warfare. That is the cup OT for special forces. Not every war is an unconventional war, but it's still a very important piece of doctrine, I believe, and I think it relates just fine to small business startups. Revolutionary, folks. Be revolutionary. Be revolutionary. All right. Check out all my other stuff on all the other websites, folks. I love you guys. Take care of yourself. Take care of your family. Be good to each other.